Right, who's going first?
Hello.
Hello.
My name is Nicoletta and I study health and social science
Uh-huh.
at Castle. Thank you so much for being here today. What made you join the police service? And how are you finding being an assistant commissioner?
Okay, well, it's a good question to start with. I've been in the police service for 32 years, so it's hard to remember why I joined. But actually, it's not really. That's a joke. The motivation for joining the police service for me was about trying to sort out the bullies and the people that hurt other people and do something about it, stand up for those that can't stand up for themselves. I've got quite a strong sense of right and wrong. I think most people do, don't they? And I want to do something about how I felt about right and wrong. I thought that, I could use my working life to make other people's lives better or safer or more productive through policing. And those are really the motivations that sort of drove me to join in the first place. And then in terms of being an assistant commissioner, I mean, it's a huge responsibility, of course. This is one of the biggest cities in the world. It's nearly over 9 million people live and work here, plus the visitors we get every day, tourists and commuters. So more than 10, 11 million people most days in London. You can imagine the feeling responsible for that is quite a big thing. And I have something like 22,000 officers that work for me, delivering policing services across London, what we call the frontline services. So it's mostly the sort of interactions that Londoners will have with the police are through my people. So I'm acutely aware of how my people behave will affect how the Metropolitan Police Service is portrayed and viewed by Londoners, and the whole issue about trust and confidence broadly rests on the shoulders of my men and women. And I would say in the vast majority of times they do a fantastic job. So it's a great responsibility, but I do enjoy it very much. I find it to be very challenging and very thought-provoking, but very satisfying as well, because I get to see all the great results of the work that our people do, and that gives me a great deal of satisfaction and pride in what they do, actually.
According to reports in The Guardian, community centres have been shown to reduce crime.
Yeah.
Do you feel we have enough of them?
Well, I think they're right. My anecdotal sort of evidence, so what I've seen in my career around things like community centres and youth centres and places where people can go and meet in a safe environment and sort of let off steam, for want of a better expression, are good things. And through the years of austerity, for various reasons, mainly funding, a lot of that provision got reduced across London. Local authorities had to make difficult decisions about where they put their money, essential services or nice to have services, and sadly I think we did lose quite a number of youth centres, community centres and those sorts of projects, whether they were local authority or third sector run. So I think my kind of policing experience tells me that they are good things, that if you can give people places to gather that are safe and controlled, then they're less likely to get into trouble. I haven't got any hard evidence that I can quote to you about that, but that's certainly my experience having policed London for such a long time.
Many parents worry about letting their children go out alone. Are they wrong to worry?
No, I've got 4 children. I worry about them all the time. They're all grown up now, by the way. Parents' job is to worry about their children, right? So of course they should worry about it, but should they be unduly worried? That's really the question. Should they be terrified of the prospect of their children going out at night? No, I don't think so. London is predominantly a safe city. If you look at the levels of violent crime or knife crime, whilst they're very newsworthy and they are still too high, if you compare London to pretty much any other major city, it's a safe city. And if people are sensible in how they choose to travel and how they choose to socialise and are alive to the dangers that do exist, of course in any big city, then I think it's you don't need to be unduly worried as a parent. And I speak as a parent of 4 young women, 3 of whom live and work in London right now. So I know how it feels.
Thank you. Does poor parenting lead to youth violent crime?
These are difficult questions for me to answer. I'm not a sociologist, am I? I think parenting is a really important part of the discipline a child needs to understand how to operate in the adult world. And I think it has to be an element, doesn't it? I think if a child is not given clear boundaries about what's right and wrong, and a child is not given, appropriate discipline when they do things wrong, how are they possibly going to learn the right behaviours to get on, let alone commit crime, but actually get on in society? And I think if you don't have proper parenting and you don't get the opportunity that proper parenting and discipline provides for you as a young person, you're more likely to make poor choices about what you do, and that can lead you into crime. Doesn't always, of course. There's lots of examples where that hasn't happened, but I think it increases the likelihood of you making poor choices, which can lead you to getting involved in crime.
Thank you. My name is Sophia, and I would like to ask, what are your greatest challenges at work?
Trying to deliver on our mission, I suppose, which is to make this city the safest city in the world, is a huge challenge. I've just told you how many millions of people live here. And London is very attractive to all sorts of different types of criminality, from terrorism through to acquisitive crime to organised crime. So trying to sort of mobilise the people that work for me and across the Met, and use the range of tactics and strategies that we can to minimise the amount of criminality, minimise the risk and the danger that sits in a city of this size, is a huge challenge. But very specifically, I mean, you don't need me to tell you that we've had a series of events over the last 18 months that have shown the Met to have failed in a number of areas. And what that tends to do is reduce the confidence that people have in us as an institution. And I think that's damaging, because the British policing model is based on policing by consent. We all know that. And policing by consent requires the citizen to assist the officer. That's why we don't have guns predominantly, because we rely on the citizen trusting and having confidence in us as an institution and being willing to step forward and support us. And you know what, I see that even now, I see that every single day across London, where an officer's on their own and they get involved in something and they're outnumbered or get in trouble, almost always members of the public will step in. And even if there's not a police officer there, members of the public will, in this city generally, step in and try and stop trouble or prevent crime. So there's a great and strong tradition of that. So one of the biggest challenges at the moment is, how do we rebuild trust and confidence in light of the high-profile events that have happened, so that we don't erode the basic premise of British policing, which is policing by consent. I think, by the way, we're a long way from that being eroded dangerously, but any small erosion is a bad thing. So I think that's one of the very, very current challenges right now.
Thank you. Who inspired you the most in your career?
Well, I've worked with loads of fantastic people, so it's hard to pin it down to one individual. But I will name one individual, and I don't know, 10, 15 years ago, no more than that, 20 years ago, I was a senior detective on homicide in South London, and I dealt with the Damilola Taylor murder and brought the killers of Damilola to justice. And in so doing, I spent a long time with Damilola's parents, Richard and Gloria. And Richard in particular, Gloria's now died sadly, but Richard I still talk to. And we've maintained a friendship over the last 20 years that was entirely brought together by the death of his son. And the way that he dealt with that incident at the time, in terms of the dignity and the support he gave us as the investigators to try and find who'd done it, but also through the disappointments of the first trial that collapsed and the second trial that was inconclusive, then the third trial, and the way that he then took what had happened to his family and broadened it out into a determination to try and prevent that ever happening to anybody else. I mean, that's a huge undertaking he took on. He continues to do that even to this day, and he's now quite elderly. And I've always found that very inspiring. And whenever I see him, we have a warm friendship. And whenever I see him, it reminds me, going back to why did I join the police service, it reminds me, that's why you join, to do that kind of thing.
My name is Ankita, and I'm a business management student. The police can tackle violence against women on their own. But what more can the police do to prevent women and girls from becoming victims of crime?
It's a very good question. It's a very topical question, isn't it? And I think what we've seen, just by context, I'm sure you know this, but what the crime figures tell us is that the extent of violence against women and girls at the hands predominantly of men has been underreported for many years. So we've seen over the last decade and longer, the only types of crime really that have gone up are crimes that are normally committed in private places, so domestic abuse crime and rape and serious sexual offending. Now, not all of it's in private places, but the majority of it is, and it's been hidden for many years because women have been, for various reasons, which I don't need to go into because you probably know, been reluctant to come and talk to the police about it, either through a fear that we won't believe them or we won't do anything about it, or they're too terrified of their partner who's still with them to make the allegation. All of these things are factors in that. So what we are now seeing is probably a glimpse of the true extent of this problem, both in private places in the home where you should feel safe, but also in out in the streets. And it ranges from everything from what 20 years ago was kind of almost a joke, sort of indecent exposure and all that kind of nasty behaviour by men in open spaces. We now treat that very, very seriously, right the way through to the most horrendous of sexual attacks and violence. So we've woken up to that, I think, as a service in the last 18 months, even more than we had before. We've got a well-developed plan in the Met to try and tackle violence against women and girls in all its forms, in all of those places I talked about, whether it's an enhanced domestic abuse response or it's better proactive patrolling in public places. We put officers into nighttime economy hotspots, nightclubs, bars, clubs, where we know that women get targeted and preyed upon. We do covert operations in those places where we put plainclothes officers in. So our whole kind of range of tactics that we've deployed traditionally against other types of criminality, we're now deploying against violence against women and girls. So there's a lot we can do. And alongside that, there's the broader thing about education and, not educating women not to be victims. What I mean is educating men about how they behave. Now, that's not necessarily a policing job, although policing has got a part to play in that. But, it's a broader social thing that we need to do. And men need to take responsibility for changing their behaviour. So we're encouraging our male officers, even if they see something, in the workplace or in the street that isn't criminal, but it's just demeaning, or like wolf whistling or leering or staring at, we now expect them to step in and say that behaviour is unacceptable. Now, of course, we can't arrest them for doing that kind of stuff because it's not, in those kind of examples, it's not necessarily against the law, but it creates the wrong environment. And so we're very, very alive to that, and we're doing all we can to try and deal with it.
What measures are you taking to reduce drug crime?
Well, drug crime is hugely problematic for us in London because I always say to my people, it's not just drug crime. What you have to think about is all of the knock-on effects that drug crime has. So the vast amounts of cash that can be generated by drug supply encourages people to form gangs to arrange the supply. The gang then operates a territory which it needs to protect, so it has to have weapons, and with those weapons it then has to engage in violence against other gangs that want to take over their territory. And you get this vicious circle that goes round and round and round. So it's drugs, violence, weapons, cash. When you target illegal cash, illegal weapons, illegal violence, or drug supply, you find it's the same people in the middle of that, whichever way you come at that. So we've been very strong on that in the Met in recent times, in my tenure. I'll give one example. So the phenomenon of county lines, you've probably heard that phrase used. This is where people in London will arrange to supply drugs in other towns and cities in England and Wales, normally by way of sending young people with packages of drugs to a town to meet with dealers, which they sell the drugs on to the local users. These are called county lines. They're operated from London, they make huge amounts of money, and they exploit young people as the couriers and the people that take the risk by carrying the drug. So we have worked very, very hard over the last 18 months to develop a methodology that targets the county lines operators and protects the young people that get caught up in the couriering of these drugs. So just some stats, in the last 18 months, we've shut down 900 county lines. We've charged and remanded nearly 2,000 drug dealers who are the organisers of these county lines and sent them to prison, and we've safeguarded hundreds of young people. That's just one example of how we're tackling drugs. There's also, of course, the much bigger issue of multi-kilo importation and sort of organised criminality that's around drugs. And we have lots of successful operations targeting those individuals as well. So it's a huge problem for the Met. And the final thing I'll say is There's only a drugs market because there's a demand. So actually what we ought to be thinking about as well, and this is a societal issue as much as anything else, is why is there such a demand for drugs? Who is driving that demand? And it's often not the people that are supplying it, it's people that work in proper jobs with, you know, pensions and decent salaries, people that work in the banking sector and big corporations. They don't see the harm that their drug use is creating. The harm is that they are, by creating the demand, these people are then criminalising others from less advantaged backgrounds to supply the drugs and creating this horrible vicious cycle. And I think we need to address the market as much as the supply.
Thank you.
I am Cassandra, I help
Hello.
a social science student. The Bank of England has warned inflation might reach 10% within months. Will this directly impact youth crime and violent crime?
That's a good question. What has happened in the past when economics have taken a downturn and people have become harder up and families have struggled with their finances more than before? What that has tended to lead to is an increase in acquisitive crime, so theft. But it doesn't necessarily therefore cut across to violence. I think those two are slightly separate issues. I think violence is driven by so many different things, and I think the economic situation has an impact, I guess. But I don't think it's. I think things like acquisitive crime, the things that you tend to expect to rise during economic hard times, because people haven't got the money to buy the daily shop, so they'll maybe go and pilfer some food items, or they might, steal a bit of spare cash from somebody because they're driven by need. And I think the violence phenomenon is not driven by need. That's driven by different things. That's all sorts of other factors there. So I think there is a difference, but I think crime, does get affected by the economic climate, but not violent crime isn't. I think a direct link to the economic climate. That's my view. You may disagree.
Community centres have been shown to reduce crime. There's lots of research in the US about this. Do you feel that community centres can help prevent crime?
Yeah, I think I said earlier that I do, on the whole, think they're great things. I can't say to you that a community centre in place A will reduce crime in place A by 10%. But all the anecdote tells you that if you give people, particularly young people, somewhere to go and socialise, which is safe and controlled up to a degree, but they feel it's their own, then it's a better option for them than sort of gathering on a street corner where other issues may come to play. So I think generally speaking, they are great things, and we should have more of them, and they do tend to, I think, mitigate some of the dangers of young people hanging around on street corners, definitely.
And lastly, what would you say to someone who is looking for a career in policing?
When can you start? Well, why wouldn't you want to join policing? It's a brilliant job. It's challenging, it's rewarding. You're doing something of social benefit. You're standing up for vulnerable people. You're a symbol of what's right and good and proper about society, and you're doing that visibly. So if you've got the gumption to do it, and the courage to do it, and moral courage, and the energy to do it, because it's tiring. It's a tiring job. Then go for it. I say it's a fantastic career, and we need as many people, young people particularly, as we can encourage to join, because we lose thousands of officers every year just through retirements, and we have to keep recruiting just to maintain numbers. So we always need good people to join the police, and I would always encourage people to think about it as a career if you're interested in the sorts of things I've talked about. Definitely.
Thank you.
Pleasure.